what your choices have been, and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed. The light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now.
Hi, and welcome to Whole Soul School and Foundation and Whole Soul Mastery. We're doing some joint podcasts right now because we want to reach a broader audience. And I am here with Dr. Paul Panzica. We haven't podcasted since I think December, where we were talking about the season of John last. And some deep things. And that's what we do, Paul. You and I deep dive. That's one of your most amazing gifts. You know how to deep dive. I think we're going to do that today. We're going to be talking about one of your most recent blog posts called The Third Incursion. And if I can just seed our conversation with the very first sentiments that you were writing, you said, in the past, the impulse of Christ had to be withdrawn, and the communities that lived in this greater truth were left to endure the wrath of the shadow's evil impulses. Prophecy states that this will no longer happen, that Christ Sophia will not be withdrawn from the hearts and souls of those who have come to know the light of God's truth. The reason for the third incursion's success is that the nature of the world has changed in the time of the Aquarian age, which is a place where the shadows of darkness are no longer able to survive. Like, that sounds like something like with Star Wars, where you'd have the words on the screen and, like this major space odyssey is about to unfold, but the shadows of darkness are no longer able to survive. Oh, I like the sound of that. Can you talk about this, Paul? I'm sure you will. The third incursion. What's incursion?
Well, once again, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here in your presence and to speak about these, I find, very interesting issues, and actually essential issues, right? So what's an incursion? And I mentioned this at one of our last lectures, a few lectures ago, but I didn't have time to elaborate on it. It was brief. And so it was something that I found in the book of Revelations, and it was in the Gnostic revelations. It was in the Apocryphon of John, the Gnostic revelations, the one that was written by the apostle that the Lord loved, right? John the apostle, right? And so, and here it was written, and he was given this information. And I think that those writings are very specific for the last age. And the last age was the age of Pisces. And then age lasts for about 2,160 years.
Okay.
And what's very interesting is if you read the Revelations, the chapters seem to almost correspond to centuries. That's the pattern that I'm seeing. So many of those things happened already. And in fact, the Rudolf Steiner, the Austrian mystic Rudolf Steiner, spent a lot of time talking about the 19th and 20th chapters. So that was really interesting, that a lot of things were going at that time, and he was talking about this in the end of the 19th and the end of the 20th century. So these things were kind of like destined to play themselves out. And so that was in the Revelations of John. That was in the Revelations in the Bible, that book, John's Revelations. But the incursion, I found, was within the Gnostic revelations. And that came from a book that didn't exist at Rudolf Steiner's time, but he made an allusion to the fact that it will surface after his death, and it does. So in this story, we're getting this narrative from John the apostle, and Jesus is speaking to him, and he's talking about how it's going to be at the end of all of this, at the end of the age. And he talks about the fact that Christ will come into this period of time that we're talking about, which is the age of Pisces, 3 different times. And that his presence, or the presence of the Christ impulse, will be so devastating to the dark forces that he'll have to withdraw. It'll have to be withdrawn. And so he talks about it that this will happen 3 different times. But because of the presence of Christ on earth, it becomes so it's such a debilitating, unstable force to the powers that are trying to control us, that it had to be withdrawn. But
I just watched a film the other day. I just want to say this. There was some part of the film where they were talking about people who are disruptors. And in a way, I'm hearing you talk about that Christ energy, right, as being a disruptor of the darkness, right?
Yes.
So powerfully so.
Yes. And so, I mean, there's no details of this. It's just mentioned in John's testimony and in the Gnostic scriptures. John's talking about this, and he's basically you're getting the sense that they were 3 major incursions, and in the first one, it probably came sometime after the death of Jesus, and that it probably was occurring around the time of the Neoplatonists, the Gnostics, and there was this beautiful marriage of Platonic philosophy and the teachings of Jesus, and basically like a whole theosophical revolution that was going on in Alexandria, and this was happening right around the time that the Catholic Church formed, or the Romans adopted their form of Christianity, right? And so this probably happened around the 3rd to 4th century, and this is when all these dictates started. And there was also, this Gnosticism existed before Christianity. It existed in a Jewish form, and the mysteries of the Kabbalah and all of those things were a form of Gnosticism. And in the Jewish community, or in the Hebrew community, there were different factions. And the Essenes were considered to be these mystical people that were very much related to Gnosis and the Gnostic, let's say, stream of consciousness. And so that in fact, Jesus was born into the Essene community, although probably was not an Essene. He was, that's a question you could ask, is how can God be a member of a religion, right? So he really outgrew all of these things, and that's actually well described by the work of Rudolf Steiner. Is that he went through every religion that was available at the time. He went through all of the teachings, the Hebrew teachings. He went through pagan teachings, and he came to the conclusion that nothing was really correct. And that there had to be something greater, than any of these religions. And so we're really kind of getting to the point where we're outstripping our own religions too, is that nothing really works in relationship to all of the doctrines.
They're man-made.
Well, yes, they are, but they were inspired by somebody who had an otherworldly experience, an experience outside of the linear time continuum. But then, look at Jesus was one of the greatest teachers. He was the greatest teacher of the last age. The last age is named after him. It's the sign of Pisces. His symbol is the fish, right? And so that was his time, right? That we really, in fact, we even mark time. Anno Domini is marked is in relationship to his life, right? But what happens is the oppressors, the same people that crucified him, are the ones that created religion around him.
But they usurp. It's that insidious infiltration, right?
Of course, of course. And so that's really what happened. And that's how insidious is the deception that played out in relationship to all of this. And they built an empire off of the distortions of his teachings, right? But if you were to read his teaching without any filters, right? And because it's a personal relationship that you have with the scriptures themselves, and not the stuff that came after his life, but what he was trying to teach us, and the stuff that they tried to destroy, by the way, the Gnostic scriptures of John, the Apocryphon of John, the Gnostic scriptures of John, were completely and utterly destroyed. The only way that they survived was that they were sealed and by a Coptic group of Gnostic Christians, and it was put in a cave, and it stood there for 1,700 years until it was discovered in the middle of the 20th century. And it would have been destroyed if the church had gotten their hands on it.
Oh, completely.
Right.
Completely. That's just like inconvenient truth.
Right.
Can I ask you, I know you're on the roll, but I'm curious, when you talk about the purest Jesus teachings, is that in a particular book in the biblical text, or is it his parables? Like, when somebody wants to know, what did Jesus say, where do you go to find that?
Well, listen, and I grew up as a skeptic, and I said this many times, and I grew up in mostly a secular environment. You know, I mean, I was baptized in the Catholic faith, but we were terrible Catholics. You know, I mean, by the time I was 5 years old, we stopped going to church, and but there was something that I could never get past, which was those teachings that existed. And even my father would tell me, he would say, son, he goes, the church is just, they're full of hypocrisy. They're full of deceit. There's a lot of bad things going on in there. But he was taught by some of the people within the church. He grew up in a parochial school that he was told that, by some of the monks. He said, he's told them, he said, we have a lot of problems. He says, but if you really want to know the truth, read the texts for yourself. Read the testaments for yourself. And so now, of course, it's been usurped by the church. And of course, they developed a whole science of theology. Tell you what those passages actually mean.
Interpret
it narrows the interpretation down to a couple of considerations that they want you to consider, but it will not. It doesn't give you all of the interpretations, or because it's an infinite amount of interpretations, or some people say there's 7 interpretations, whatever it is. They don't talk about that in most organized religions. So I always felt that when I heard those passages, those little parables, those little brief, statements of clarity that came from the Testament, the 4 books in the New Testament, they made sense to me. And I used to challenge that, and I used to say, all right, well, wait a minute, all right, now, let's see if by contemplating this for decades, whether or not I can find some weakness in any of these teachings. I never been able to find any. And if you really want to know, Rudolf Steiner, who was considered one of the greatest of all the clairvoyants, who could read the Akashic records. Most people, when they get a chance, when they have the capacity to do this, to look accurately back into our human history, what would be the first thing I would look at would be the life of Jesus. Was it true?
Right. Was it true?
Right? Was it true? Steiner did that. And not only, he said that it's extremely accurate. What is portrayed in those writings is extremely accurate. Now, he had the ability to experience it
Directly.
in Akashic field. And so in Akashic field, it's not just visualizing. You can feel what everyone else is feeling. You can sense it, what they're feeling, and what's going through their soul, their emotionality, and all these other things are happening. He can sense that. It's like an end of life review for us. If we have a near death experience, we may actually experience our life in reverse, just how it's supposed to happen, and we will experience our life from everyone else's perspective and how they felt in our actions and deeds. Right? That's so that's, I mean, if you want an endorsement for the New Testament, don't take my word for it. Rudolf Steiner spent a large part of his life going through, not everything, but much of the major teachings, and explaining it from a much more in-depth perspective. So I think that they're there, and I think that they're so powerful the church couldn't destroy them. It was beyond their capacity to destroy it, right? So because they had to adopt the church, or the church, the Gnostic church, and they had to Romanize it and make it something that was useful for them. So they just got us into the habit of not reading it. I mean, they kept it all in Latin, and no one was able to read it, not until really like the times of the Reformation.
Wow.
You didn't know what was going on. And quite frankly, there were people during the days of the heretics. These were the Cathars. That was during the second incursion, which I'll get to in a minute. And they were the Valdensians. The Waldensians, it's sometimes called Waldensians, or the Valdensians. And their only crime was to read the Bible for themselves, and they were exterminated just like the Cathars were. That was it. That was it.
Censorship.
So
if
you're looking for the source, it's there. It's always been there. It's always been there, and it's there for us. I think in the best of light, it's there for us to validate our own experiences, because in a Gnostic tradition. Gnostic means knower. You prerequisite for gnosis, and I wanted to mention this too, because you mentioned it in the lecture that I was listening to this morning. It was really beautiful. I mean, and so you were talking about thinking and where thinking leads us to.
Yes.
You did say that,
right?
And you said thinking leads to us in this position right now. And I think what you were saying is it leads us into a bad place if you let your mind do too much of the thinking. Gnosis means knowledge of the inner self, or knowledge of the heart, right? And so but the prerequisite to gnosis is thinking. Except that, and that was one of the things Rudolf Steiner wanted to try to teach people, is he was trying to teach them to think clearly, or to think unfettered, without all the preconditions. And we've been conditioned to think in certain ways. So scholarship is extremely important. Going through those writings, those ancient writings, whether they're canonical or Gnostic, there's still a lot of truth that will resonate with our soul. There's gnosis in the New Testament. There absolutely is, because to this day, people can't figure out and accurately interpret a lot of the parables. You talk about the parable of the talents. I've never heard any conventional minister actually convey it in the way that I see it, or the parable of the king and the wedding feast. I interpreted it a completely different way. But why do I interpret it that way? Is because I had vision
Right.
that
Nowhere.
instructed me on what this
Yes.
was. And it wasn't just one vision, it was a lifetime of visions and impressions and contemplations that led me to a completely different way of looking at those texts. Right.
Right. It's amazing. There's something that also that happens. I just heard in what you just shared back with me from the transmission that I shared. This is how it works. When we come together, we can learn so much from each other, right? Because we each have pieces. And it is interesting, like when you're on the return path back to union, back to the awakening, back to mastery, you've got to go through the thinking, right? And
Right.
and so you can't avoid it, where it can give you totally or very much false perception. It also is something that gives you a clarity where you know its purpose, and it isn't to run your life, but it is to be a conduit of your deeper guidance somehow. I guess I was just feeling that and this brings in the feeling. It's the knowing. It's being led deeper than your thinking mind can, but we have to master the thinking. We have to go through it. We have to be deceived. We have to go through all these things and turn all the puzzles inside out and feel like we're missing pieces until you realize the missing pieces were somewhere inside you. Like that's the path of mastery.
Right. I mean, and of course, in this day, there's an extreme, an extremely aversion to reading anything. Right. If you write something that's longer than like it takes somebody to read for longer than 3 minutes, forget it. You lose them.
Right.
No one's
Seriously,
gonna
the people who
read
are
it.
meant for my transmissions and your work too.
Right.
It's like
It's not
the
gonna
beginner
work.
soul. It's not the
No.
beginner soul.
But what we failed to do is what we've done. They did a great job of this. Is that they turned scholarship into pure living hell. They turned an academic exercise into just a huge enslaving endeavor. School has become intolerable.
Laborious, but beyond
It's laborious.
laborious. It's another kind of
and
enslavement.
Children, so they're already conditioning our children, with the new forms. They're not new anymore, but with Common Core and all these other crazy curriculums, they're destroying their love to learn by creating the most intolerable situation for them. And so you have a whole generations of people now that have an aversion and avoidance to what scholarship really should be. It's joyful if there has to be a mentor in those situations. Some people need one, some people don't. But one of the secrets to esoteric training and to teaching is that you can only learn this information through love. That's it. And there has to be love of the subject. There has to be love of the pupils. There has to be love to the teachers. And the only people that could ever teach me anything in my life were people that I actually had a great reverence for, who I felt a true love for, right? And so they've done a great job in destroying that. But in the first incursion, when they tried to wipe this out the first time, the great teacher of Alexandria at that time, her name was Hypatia. Hypatia. And Hypatia was, if you were to look at the school of Athens, which is in the Vatican, and it's in one of the princely or one of the cardinals' palaces, wherever this is at. I can't remember the actual chamber, but you walk through the door, you don't even see it. You walk through the door, And on the opposite wall, when you walk in, you see this kind of like muted giant mural of, it's really going on. And you walk into the middle of the room, and then you take in the sides, and then you turn around and you see, the school of Athens. You see Plato and Aristotle, and you see all of these great philosophers there. And I can't remember. I think there's about 30 different people, 26 or 20, 30. I think there was over 30 philosophers, but there's only one woman in the entire mural, and that's Hypatia. Well, and she was the last one of the school of Athens. And then what did they do to her? They killed her. The zealots killed her. And the zealots of the Roman Catholic Church eventually, they killed her in a horrible way. They flailed her alive. They pulled all of her skin off. And it was just it was this horrific thing. But they also destroyed the temples, the teaching temples, and they razed it all to the ground, and this happened, and it was horrible. I would say that was the first incursion, because what was happening at that time, the Neoplatonists, there was the love that the teachers, that the students had for Hypatia was legendary. So in Greek culture, and this was of course, this was in Egypt, but in Greek culture, women were not allowed to teach men, and they weren't allowed in their governmental structures, or weren't allowed. She had every privilege that anyone else had. Why? Because she was their teacher, and they loved her, profoundly loved her. And she was, and so could you imagine being taught by somebody like that? Allegedly, Jesus had a great teacher who was a woman.
Wow.
Yes. So,
not that it surprises me that a woman can do that, but that I'd never heard that before.
It shouldn't surprise any of us, because this is how teaching goes. The pupils who loved Socrates mourned for his death. But Socrates was, again, this great teacher, right? So teaching was not about taking tests. It was not about knowing minutiae facts. That was all crap, right? This was about integrating and seeing the bigger pictures in life and understanding the greater questions, right? Could you imagine what it was like? And so they were bringing everything that was working. They were bringing in some of the paganism. They were bringing some of the Hebrew teachings in, the Kabbalistic teachings, the secret teachings. They were bringing the secret teachings of Jesus. All of these were coming together, and it was flourishing.
And they can't have that. The darkness can't have that.
Not only that, but the great library of Alexandria was burned to the ground right after all this happened. That was the first incursion. And the Gnostic religion, it wasn't the groups of people that consider themselves Gnostics. They were on the run, and there was a genocide against them, and they wiped everything out. They burned their churches down. The only thing that was left standing was what was hidden from them, which was the Naj Hammadi codices, and then pieces of jewelry that they felt had value, so they kept that. And some of the writings that were not destroyed were reworked by the church, and so those were
interesting. How you say that, I love that. That which was not destroyed was reworked.
Oh, the Apostle Paul was very much a very Gnostic soul. One of the greatest of all of the apostles of Jesus. Half of what is in the Bible he didn't write. Other church fathers wrote on his behalf, and that's some of the more heavy duty stuff that we may not necessarily like or do it. But some beautiful things that he wrote those are truly Gnostic, beautiful pieces, right? Insightful, amazing stuff. But not everything that's credited to him is his.
Right. It is the peeling back of the layers, but that's also something that I just want to acknowledge that, like, of course, the powerful presence of the teachers. You know, we just look at our world today. It's like not the lowest paid jobs, but certainly there's no appreciation showering them with the blessings deserved. And, you know, and then you take away all the things that would engage students to have some chance of integration or expression or going into the muse, which is the arts, right? And that's just been sliced out, right? That there's no money. I remember driving behind a car, it was probably 5-10 years ago now, something like, you know, if the military had to have a bake sale to have their wars, like so many of the school gatherings and clubs and things that people want to get off the ground, they have to have bake sales because there's no money to support them. Right. And then we just money print for the other stuff. Right. It's just people just have to look a little beyond the surface of anything. And you can see the upside downness. But I want to go back then. So when you're saying the third incursion, this is the three disruptions like this, where it's going too well. There's too much light on the planet. We have to darken things up. Right. Is that?
Yeah. If you can imagine, just in the first incursion, if we were allowed to the true teachings of Jesus, which is basically, it integrates everything together. It integrates the ancient Greek philosophies and the ancient Greek stories and the mysteries of the Kabbalah and all these other things coming together, 1700 plus years ago. We might have been way ahead. We probably would have already ascended. I mean, there's just amazing things that were being done at that time, there was true scholarship and there was true freedom to think, without being conditioned, and yes, go ahead.
Can I ask you a question? Because I was just with someone last night and they were talking about these cycles and these seasons of the, 2000 years and whatnot. And then we all know that this is another timeline of ascension for those aligning with that. She was saying how there were other opportunities to ascend and there have been other cycles and seasons of that, and sometimes where no one was ascending, people just weren't ready. But in the time that you're describing of like that first incursion, would you say that might have been a portal that we might never have needed where we are had it not been usurped?
Well, there was that story about Jesus driving the devil out of a possessed man, and then the devil said, "What are you doing? It's not your time." And he still cleansed the person of the possession and drove the devils out into the pigs, and then the pigs ran off the side of a cliff, right? So there's something about ages. There's a divine will to each age.
Wow, there's a divine will to
there's a divine will to each age. That's why we're having this really great discussion, and that's why we're looking with great anticipation to Aquarian time, because Piscean time sucked in many ways, but that's archetypal to the energies of Pisces. These are universal constants. They can't be changed. Even whatever the darkness can throw at it, they can't change it.
And what is it about Pisces that made it suck so bad? Like,
so
it was incarceration, wasn't it? Is it imprisonment more?
Yes, it can it represents all of those things. So and through that, spiritual enlightenment, right?
Oh,
So through that spiritual enlightenment, there was an essay that I wrote, but it's a beautiful, I think her name Barbara Hanclaw, was just an amazing astrologer and channeler. She's just an amazing person. I read a lot of her stuff, and my wife has a great respect for her also. But I believe she wrote the essay on the Piscean archetype and the connection between the divine fool or the holy fool. So yeah, so once you know the truth, and if you were living in let's say a reality that was based on conditions, and everything has a condition to it, and love is conditioned, right? And then you realize that love doesn't have conditions, and you realize that the truth of the great teachers that were trying to teach us this, and then you realize that what did it get you? Look at what happens to Jesus trying to teach us this truth, love without conditions in a world of severe conditions. And what happens? He gets crucified, right? And so after a while, you start understanding that same thing happened to the Gnostics, and the same thing will happen to the Cathars and the heretics. So the fool, you by knowing this information, you're tolerated only as a fool.
Ah, wow.
Only
That's
as a
profound,
fool.
right?
Right. In that age, you're only tolerated as a fool. And so the fool is actually the one that has ascended, that has holy vision. And there was and even in like the in the medieval days, and when a really great king would have a fool that was the only one who could speak the truth in the royal court, because he did it with jest. But a great king or queen would understand that they were the only ones that could call him out on their BS. And
right. This is interesting that you're bringing this up. Do you know that Tucker Carlson on Fox News has this whole, I think it's a series, but like the death of comedy. Apparently, it sounds like the censorship is going after perhaps the fool in modern day times. It's not
yes,
okay to talk about
yes,
political
because
things.
if it was in the 70s, there'd be all kinds of great comedians that were fearless, that would have spoken out about all of the transgressions and indiscretions and all these terrible things that have been going on. Their voices are gone, and there's no one courageous enough to stand up and say it in a way that would make us laugh. And I'm going to tell you, let me tell you something about that. That energy is the divine feminine energy. Laughter is a feminine principle. Laughter will shake the core of these ossified foundations and crumble the core, or crumble these foundations. And this is, I'm not making this up. So there were these beings called Hathors, divine feminine beings. And these were beings who conveyed wisdom. Listen to this. They conveyed wisdom to their pupils. I have actually had experiences with them. And they teach in a lyrical, poetic way. But they also do it with the most profound sense of humor that you're ever going to encounter. And so when you're in the midst of a Hathor's teaching you, you're laughing so hard. You're laughing from the core of your belly. There's tears rolling out of your eyes, because it's such an exquisite connection to the higher truth. That is the joy of higher learning, of what can be accomplished through that. And they carry,
the knowing has to be so deep that it then can be,
it's unshakable.
Shared.
It's unshakable, and it's cosmic. It's from such a higher realm.
Cosmic, yes.
Yes.
I feel it as you're talking. And they were physical beings, though, that you're talking about.
They had kind of like a face like a cow, and they had these big ears. And a lot of the Egyptian goddesses mimicked them or looked like them. All right. And they were really tall. Hathor was this divine feminine goddess. And all of the Greek goddesses hold in their hand something called a sistrum. A sistrum. And it's we can think of like the masculine king holding a scepter, right? It looks like a mace. Dictate this and this and this and this. And this is how I create my fiefdom through my mandates. The sistrum was a vibratory, like a tuning fork. It had these, it looked like a little, like a harp on a handle. And it supposedly vibrated. And it represented a higher level of resonance that would demineralize things. So through laughter, we demineralize these ossified mandates or dictates or rules that have become enslaving to us. The only way we can bring it down is through humor, is through laughter, is through divine inspired thought. But it has to come through the levity of things, not through you can't fight this hardness with hardness. It won't work.
Right.
It has to be a demineralizing process. The goddess always held it. So what was built up by the gods, they just came. There was a certain point where there was a need to bring it all down, to just vibrate it down to dust and start over again.
Wow. So given that, has the second incursion then that also happened? That's past tense.
Yeah, the second incursions happened also. So the goddess has the power to do this, right? And so we're in that time frame now where there's like a jihad against the divine feminine. There's no doubt about it. There's a jihad against the divine feminine, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, because a jihad can be a holy war in just cause. So we'll call it an evil jihad, a demented jihad, is right. So we're looking at a crusade against this reckoning power, this divine power, right? And so this is the divine feminine principle. So like I said, the first incursion is really kind of represented by the most divine and amazing teacher that the Western culture had ever had, who was killed by literally the Roman Catholic Society, Roman Catholic Church. So that was Hypatia. And then after that, all of that knowledge fell and we went into a dark age. And then the emergence of another culture happened. And I always say that these cultures were cultures that knew the truth of Christ Sophia, or Sophia Christ, or however you want to say it, but they were living in Christ Sophia. They were living in the truth of Christ Sophia. And the second incursion occurred against people that were living in the south of France and in some parts of Spain and northern Italy. And this was a very special part of the world, because this is, at least from our mythologies, this is where Mary Magdalene came, and Lazarus John, who was her brother, and Martha. And it was from that point in the world, in Europe, where they started building this network of churches and communities that were connected to the teachings of the divine feminine and the teachings of Jesus. That was a marriage. So the teachings of the divine feminine really are ancient. They're Celtic teachings. And so Jesus just spiritualizes it. That's all. He just gives it a greater perspective. He marries it back to the heavens. And so you have this amazing, amazing part of the world that over time started to prosper.
Right.
Extremely prosper. They had, by the time that they were going up against, again, the Roman Catholic Church, there was virtually everyone could read. There was equality between the genders. Women were allowed to rule, and they were allowed to be priests in the community, and all these other things were occurring, and they were prosperous, and they were true. Even all the people that knew them called them the true Christians, and this was a community of love that existed, and it prospered, and these were these amazing cathedrals and castles and all of these communities that were just prospering, and they were teaching a different form of Christianity. They were teaching a Gnostic form where both the divine Sophia and Christ were in union with themselves, with each other. And actually, the only way that a culture really is able to flourish is when the divine feminine is reinstated into her natural role. The divine feminine is our heart, right? And so we were living in a community that was being led by these heart-based principles, just like you were saying in your lecture this morning, because it's the heart that leads us to the right place, not exclusively the brain or the head.
I haven't obviously posted my marinades message that it will come out tomorrow. We're recording this, and this will come out next week. This will come out after I did my marinades. But I found it interesting that the feminine physiology is the receiver, right? Like the womb, and right, the female parts is the receiver, and I guess the male is the giver. And yet when I was talking, I think I was talking on camera about this. Isn't it interesting when we're talking this way about the divine feminine? She's the giver. The heart is the giver of the instructions, of the gnosis, and the masculine needs to be the receptor, right? The receiver. Isn't that interesting how we're built physiologically, but this deeper spiritual overlay? I found that just an interesting.
Yeah, no, it's a food for thought or deep contemplation, right? Source of deep contemplation. Wait a minute now. So you're right. The feminine principle is a receptive principle, and the masculine principle is a seminal principle. And so why is the divine feminine in charge? Why is the divine feminine the one that's giving the information?
Right.
Well, there's a third principle that's missing out of all of that. So we are we're like four different things. We have a physical body, we have an ego body, we have an astral body, and we have this etheric body, right? And so the heart is the astral energies. It's emotional. It's our emotionality. But the love actually comes from a higher plane. So you can think of the divine feminine as the soul, which it is, right? But it's one step closer to the spirit. And so you have the spirit-filled soul, which is a feminine principle. But because the feminine principle doesn't have the filters of the ego, doesn't have the filters of that masculine energy, the calculating energy, it is a direct channel to the spiritual. And so that's the divine feminine is still recepting. But the divine feminine isn't not enslaved to the ego mind like it is now.
Right.
The ego mind is now taking a back seat, is now subjecting itself to the knowledge of the heart. And so now that the divine feminine is able to receive the impulses, the natural impulses of the world and the natural impulses to the heavens, it's totally reversing the flow of consciousness.
Oh wow, that's big.
Yeah, it's huge. And that's destined to happen, because I might have even been in that article. In the end, I think I'm concluding by saying that the polarity of consciousness is it's not a question of if, it's a question of when will it shift on a global level. See, they're already talking about this in the mainstream media. They were just making a big deal about it when I was writing that essay, and it was basically like the Earth's core has stopped spinning. So think about it. The Earth is, you know, in the center of the Earth, we have this molten core of iron, and it spins and it creates a magnetic field. And the magnetic energy flows from north to south, from top to bottom, from ego to down to your feet. Right. That's how it flows. It's flowing from the North Pole to the south, but it's just constantly looping its way up. So it's coming down from our head to our feet, It's like consciousness is locked into that position. Now they're basically saying since 2009, the spin of the inner Earth, the molten core of the Earth, has slowed down to the point not only where it stopped, but it's starting to reverse itself. So the magnetic field is going to reverse from, instead of north to south, south to north. And that, I think, is going to happen on a global scale. And all of a sudden our consciousness is going to flip, and we're going to be able to receive, instead of the conditioned ego mind dictating to the rest of our bodies, you know, what truth is. It's going to finally reverse itself, so that now the conditioned ego mind doesn't exist anymore. It's going to take a backseat to, you know, you have not only these bodies are also seats of intelligence. So you have emotional intelligence, you have a higher level of spiritual intelligence, which is related. That's the interconnecting part. That's the fifth density. So that's all going to switch. I think it's switching now. You know, I don't think officially the pole has flipped, but if you look over the last decade, the magnetic North Pole is shifting way away from the north.
Wow.
The traditional North Pole. It will flip. It might happen in our lifetime. I pray that it does. Maybe it won't. I don't know, but it's happening. And I think when that happens, you know, we'll have a completely different perspective and a completely different alignment regarding the way that we think, you know, and the way that knowledge or consciousness comes to us.
And even with that, the great reset that we hear about, and also the revaluation, I don't know, it's like what's mirrored to us in our outer world, but really is happening inside us. It is the flip inside. And are you also saying that it kind of came to a standstill, that iron core? Is that like a 0 point? I mean,
I don't know. You got all these top scientists, you know, or at least the ones that the media pays attention to, saying, "Oh, it stopped spinning." What? You know, and so, you know, maybe they're doing it to scare us, to say, "Oh, we're going to have a big pole shift, and then we're going to have all these."
Maybe it's part of a narrative,
all this other crap.
Right.
It's
To
not
justify.
not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. We're talking about something really amazing, that consciousness will shift. I mean, it's already shifted for many of us, but I still can't access. We can't access that infinite intelligence. You know, they're trying to create a facsimile of what's really happening, and they're trying to entice you into it and lock your awareness into that, so that when it really happens in a natural state, and you're turned on finally, because we're kind of like turned off at this point, you won't be able to access it, especially if you hardwire your central nervous system with all the crazy gadgets that they're talking about. They'll be able to keep you in that perpetual state, of whatever magnetic lock they have over us. They'll keep that on us. If you succumb to what they're trying to do to us.
So you're also talking about this Christ Sophia
Yes.
energy that will not be withdrawn from the hearts and souls. Like it's almost like this inner magnetism is going to outshine whatever the dark
Yes.
plans might be.
Yeah.
It's like there's nothing supporting. They can burn the libraries, they can do the things that they've done, but it's not going to stop now. Well, I mean, that's been a phrase that some of us know. Nothing can stop what is coming. Maybe this is the bigger picture of that. Nothing can stop this bigger cosmic picture of that's unfolding. Nothing's going to stop the light that's unfolding.
Right. And so again, everything is determined by the dictates of the age, the divine will, not the dictates, but the divine will of the age, of the age. See, and so it happened. The community of love flourished in that part of the world where Magdalene and Lazarus, John, and her sister, they founded it, and it became a flourishing little empire. And it was the closest thing that we had to heaven on earth. Because it was a bigger community now, where it was an egalitarian community where we had extreme tolerance. And sorry, it breaks me up to think about this because I experienced it. But then we were betrayed. It was felt like a massive betrayal, because what happened was we thought that because of our love and because of our knowledge of the higher truth, that a genocide couldn't possibly happen to us. And then it was unleashed against us, and it happened. And we couldn't fathom it. We couldn't deal with it. And it was a protracted war that lasted almost a century. And so we had to go underground after that. And our hearts were broken.
Exactly.
So that was the second incursion. If it was allowed to have existed, then it would have become the predominant force of the world, right? If it was allowed to have existed. And so that's why they went after it even worse this time with these horrific genocides. And then that just spawned all of the entire Inquisition was related to that. And then they went after everybody, and that lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's never really ended. And so then that's what happened. And so those of us who remember it, those of us who had to survive it, became, like myself, extremely existential. And then that was the only way we could deal with it, and to put a lot of these questions on hold, and just to live your life in a very existential way. Or many of my brothers and sisters, our brothers and sisters, who went into the occult, into the deeper aspects of the occult, because by the end of all of it, we were fighting fire with fire. We had a much smaller physical, let's say, army that we had in order to defend our villages and our hamlets and our cities, but we couldn't stop the wrath that was amassed by the Roman Catholic Church through mercenaries from all over Europe and from around the world it was unleashed against these small communities, and they were wiped out. They were decimated. It was just horrific. And so this happened, right? And so in the end, the best we could do was we could try to conjure up through magic some form of defense. And to this day, there's still so many of us walking around that are scarred from all of this. There's so many people that haven't really been able to let go of that, But and I see it in so many of my friends and people that I meet. They still have it. They're still holding on to it, and they're great warriors. They have to let go. That fight's over with. Right. And so, I'm racking my mind trying to figure out, why was this allowed to happen? Well, it was the will of the age. It was this whole imprisonment.
This is all during Pisces still.
Hey, listen, we were all crucified just as much as Jesus was crucified in that last age.
Yes.
They go through this horrific crap. and still are going through it.
Yes.
I'll bring it up again. I saw it happening. We were all crucified over the last few years. And it's happening. It happened. It happened, right? And what are we going to do about it? And so, I think that we had to experience this from a cosmic perspective. We had to fully understand what evil is capable of doing.
Mm.
Some people say that I hear this from, and now I hear this from you, Maria. I never heard this from you, and your sources are amazing. I'm constantly trying to scrutinize everything that you're saying, and it makes me so enlightened to hear what you're saying, because it's very much in step with what I'm saying. But I hear from other sources that we're all going to be rewarded for this experience. And I got news for you. If you're doing it for this reason, that's not going to happen. That's pie in the sky. That's not why we're doing this. And I hate to say this, but we have to really understand what the reward is. The reward is the experience.
Oh, yes.
The
evolution, the mastery.
As horrific as it was. Because in the future, where we play a more active role in our destiny, not only in our destiny, but probably in the universe's destiny at some level, we will have that wisdom with us. And that's invaluable. We've lived through it, because there are many beings from higher, let's say, realms or densities that wouldn't have come into this reality to have the experience, and they never will. But we have, and so by
depth of gnosis that wasn't known before. It's a depth of gnosis,
right? And so we that is part of our soul's experience, and so we will never be fooled again. That's why we're looking at this whole third incursion now, and we're going, come on. I mean, people got to wake up, because we've seen it over and over and now over again, But in John's testimony and in the Gnostic scriptures of the Revelations, it's said that the third time the Christ Sophia will not be pulled back, right? Could you imagine, though, at the second incursion, Christ Sophia was too painful to live it within that awareness, and we had to go underground, and we became existential and jaded and angry and all those other things. But at this point now, I'm done. I'm done, and
burn it out. You have to burn through it.
It's burned out, but it's never going to leave my heart again. And if I'm leaving this world today or tomorrow, I'm fine. I'm fine with all of it, because I've learned my lessons, and that's my way of life now, is living in this Christ Sophia balance, and that's all I want. That's all, and that's the only direction that I'm moving towards, and then that's it. And so the third incursion probably is now. It's happening now. I don't know when it started, but there were so many people that started waking up to it. Well, I would say within the last few decades.
Yeah.
I would say that maybe and some people say it happened in 98 or 87. I don't know.
87, right?
It's now, and the age has changed. So we're no longer living in the Piscean age.
When did that shift? When was that time window of time? If there's not an
there's a lot of people that they'll say one thing or they'll say another thing.
Was it post 2012?
No, for me it was December of 2020. And that was when the Grand Conjunction occurred. Right. So that was when the Grand Conjunction occurred. I believe it was 2020. I don't think it's 2020. I'm pretty sure it was 2020. It might have been 2021. I don't know. I can't remember. But it was when the Grand Conjunction occurred. Then I think it was 2020. So I think that was, there was a great symbolism there that it had begun. And I think that in April of 2021, there was also, not April, in March of 2021, there was also another great equinox there that was also giving, as I was reading it, the same type of energy that we were now entering literally into an Aquarian age. And so some people are saying that it really isn't going to happen until this shift in awareness or shift in consciousness occurs. So there's a lot of people talking about timelines, and the numbers that keep coming up are like somewhere between 2033 and 2036 is the time when the poles shift or consciousness flips or something happens on a let's say a global scale that that turns us on to this Christ awareness. You know, it hasn't, I've experienced it, but again, we always talk about how we have to come back and we still have to live in this low density energy, you know. So, but there's many different channelers that are saying, and many different sources that are all coming towards that time frame. I'm not sure if that's right or if it's not right. For many of us, it's already happened, but we'd like to see the light really be turned on in all of the souls that
being victorious again.
Yeah. So I think we're now in this third incursion, and they're doing everything that they can to derail us from reaching our goal. But it's not going to happen because it's no longer their time.
Right. Right.
But they're going to now. So get this: these are like lawyers on steroids. They look at every potential permutation of these rules that they could bend and do whatever they can. So in order for them to survive, it's not going to be quite a scorched earth, although they're trying to do that. But I don't think that the powers that are kind of controlling all of this are going to allow it to happen. Although there's a lot of crap that's going on that's very frightening, you know, if you really start thinking about it. But what they have to do is they have to create a virtual matrix that they can control. And they have to entice you willingly into it, because at some point there's going to be a separation. They will not be able to survive. Probably when the consciousness flips, they won't be able to survive. So their food supply will be cut off. They won't be recognized as having any authority over anyone else. And so they won't be, because they're parasitic energies. They cannot produce their own life.
They need our life force to do their work for them.
Yes. That's why this has all happened to us ages and ages and ages ago. And so there are still many people that will take that ride, or will decide that I want to have this experience. And it will be in a virtual reality. It's not in a physical reality. It's in a virtual reality. Wow. And so, yeah, I mean, it's going to be an artificial construct of something. So it'll be a facsimile of the earth, but it won't be the earth. Now, we had mentioned before off camera that I was going to try to get us to a point where we could talk about this concept called the eighth sphere.
Right.
And so that's kind of where this all
leads
to. Yeah, it leads into that.
Yeah.
So should I go?
You know, and we'll put a little bit of at least a conceptual time limit so that on this, just because it encapsulated, because the eighth sphere, I think, it's kind of like a black hole. It's like a darker, it's an awareness of some darker things, but, and then leading into, if you can know what it is, then you're not victim of it, right? You just are the observer and you make very conscious choices to not
Yes.
accept that as your reality. Yeah,
Yes.
please.
Yes. So this was a concept that a lot of the esoteric people, maybe like in the 1800s, late 1800s, and this was a very hot subject. A lot of people were talking about the eighth sphere, and Rudolf Steiner threw his 2 cents into all of this too, and he said, "You don't know what you're talking about." He said that the eighth sphere is this, and he basically spent a large part of his work trying to warn us about what was going to happen and how this eighth sphere would be created. And so this is the idea. The idea that Steiner had was that there will be these otherworldly beings that will step in and take charge of things. And all of these things are very much in our thoughts now, because that's what it seems like. They're not following any humanistic impulses anymore, and what they're doing is they're trying to enslave us. But that whoever these people are, they're answering to otherworldly forces, and he was very specific about calling the otherworldly forces Sarath, or Ahriman, or Lucifer, whatever you want to call it. But he said that the source of it comes from the sun demon, which is he called Sarath. And Sarath is like the shadow. It's like the sun has a shadow.
Wow.
Yes. Apollo has a shadow.
Hmm.
So the sun god Apollo is this amazing god who's a healer god, and he taught us poetry and archery, and he taught us all of these great teachings, and he loved humanity, but he had a dark side to him. It was called Apollyon, and Apollyon means destroyer. So he's just, now think about it. All the gods have shadows. All gods have a positive side to them. All of them have a negative side of it. But what guy would have the biggest shadow and the most powerful shadow? The sun god, right? Because he would cast the biggest shadow. So that's where this whole energy comes from. And if you look at Apollo in the darker elements of it, he definitely looks a lot like Lucifer, Satan, Ahriman. I mean, that's really where that's all coming from. And so Steiner was going on and on and on about how he really came from this Sarath energy, which was the antithesis of the light, and that it had its connection to the sun. Now, all of us have a shadow. We all have a shadow, and our shadow is the dark element of the ego. We have a high element of the ego, but with this conditioned element of ego that sticks to us like tar every single time we incarnate into this world and we start to develop into adults. It starts to manifest again, right? And all of these transgressions and all these mistakes that we made, we have to rectify. We have to zero out the karma. We have to learn through these. And that's why we're here again, to try to work through that karma, right? And so there's the shadow forces are connected to that, and it's all connected really to the eighth sphere. And in that sense that it wants to survive the coming of God's light and the ascension of Gaia and the ascension of the human beings who are feeding it, right? And so in order to do that, and Steiner was all about this, is that he would say that these shadow forces that we have created, we create the shadow force. We create it. The whole universe is created through our consciousness. So we create it. And so we create Satan and we create Lucifer. Why? Because we do rituals for those things to favor us, to give us power. What do you think that the ancient Greeks did with Apollo? They created temples to him, and once they figured out what money was, they showered him with money. What's the hell's Apollo going to do with money? They weren't giving it to Apollo. They were creating or giving it to the dark force of Apollo, or the shadow of Apollo, the Polyon. They were creating empires, materialistic empires. They were empowering that. But see, that was when we were in a really low state of awareness or consciousness. Now we're going to go beyond that. We're going to see that that's can't be practiced anymore. There's no energy left in it. And so in order for these energies to survive, or this darkness to survive, it's creating out of our souls, out of our energy. It's harvesting this. It's creating kind of like a facsimile of the earth. And it's maybe even a mineralized earth, not just in an electronic form, but a mineralized earth. But it has no spirit. It has no life in it. It's going to be a world where there is no divine feminine, because again, there's this war against the divine feminine that will never be allowed into this reality, which is just going to be this egotistical construct of cold calculating, information that's all going to be run by AI. That's what this is. And Steiner saw it 100 years ago. He said, this is all going to happen. And that's what's happening now. So, but it's a choice. They're not going to force you into it by gunpoint. They're going to coerce you maybe, but it's all a scam. It's all a scam. And those who go into it are doing it through their own volition, through their own free will. They're going to go into it. Maybe they're frightened, and they feel they have no other choice.
That's the feeling. I mean, that's definitely the compression is.
Well, that's how
there's no other choice, but I have to do this, right? So they choose it when they feel like they have no other choices left.
They can't see how they could possibly survive outside of it, because they've been conditioned to believe that that's the only way they could survive. Now we're in a different age, right? So it doesn't have life anymore. It's losing its power, and so this is being created, and I'm not sure how the separation is going to work. I'm not really, frankly, don't even care how the separation is going to work. All I can say is that the natural forces of life, of God, of Gaia, of the heavens, are not going to be part of that, and your higher self is not going to be part of that either. Your higher self is connected to all of those godly things, all of the spiritual things. It's not going to be part of that.
Right.
So one of the things that people forget when they talk about this eighth sphere, and I have lots and lots and lots of friends who love to talk about it, is that it's a false eighth sphere. It's not the eighth sphere. It's a false eighth.
Oh, wow.
Yes, because it's a virtual reality that's being created by all of our shadow forces that want to continue to have this experience, in this darkness. And let's see how dark it can really get. And let's see how much more we can continue to play this game. But it's not the real eighth sphere. So 8 is really an interesting number, because 8 is extremely spiritual, holy number. It's the 8th sign of the zodiac is the Scorpion, is Scorpio, right? And Scorpio is the point where we transfigure ourselves.
Wow, that's interesting too.
Yes. So it could go either way. You can have we're in the whatever this energy is. You're either going to go in one direction, and you're going to continue to live your Scorpion life in an adversarial reality, and hostile adversarial reality that's enslaving. Or you talk about this in your lecture. I think you talked about it this morning. You were talking about being reborn again. Dying to yourself.
Oh, dying to yourself.
Ego,
yes.
That's called a second death.
Right.
So in that situation, now you're resurrecting yourself as the eagle or as the phoenix. Right. So now you've transfigured yourself from the lowly Scorpion into a higher being, a being of a noble being, right? And so So that also is the option. And that is also part of the true eighth. That's the eighth sphere. That's the real eighth sphere. The other way to think about it is that they talk about the 7 rays. And so the rays are connected to the 7 chakras. They're connected to the 7, the colors of the rainbow, the days of the week, all these other things are actually all connected. The 7 major planetary bodies, the celestial bodies that truly affect us, they're all connected to this. And in Kabbalistic terms, it's when we can bring all of those energies together in harmony. That's like when you zero out your karma, when you resolve all of those inner conflicts, then you work through all of those rays, all of those spheres. Then you ascend into the 8th sphere, which is the sphere where all of the energies are in harmony, working together. So it's not a bad thing. The 8th sphere is actually a very amazing, noble thing, and we're working towards that ascension. That's really another way of looking at ascension. But there's 2 paths. Again, there's the ennobled path, the higher path, or the path of the phoenix, the path of the eagle phoenix, or then there's that scorpion path that you can continue to take. And it's going to get darker and it's going to get stranger. But people who are listening to this, or people like us, we're just saying, when's this going to, let's get this done. It's too much.
Yes, and I in my view, that's the choice to enter the full breadth of the gifts of the 8th sphere, is to acknowledge that the whole thing that has been such a disaster and a mess is it in and of itself a non-reality, even though it looks real, that itself can be the holograph, that we're choosing, I don't know, the organic sphere of experience where we enter more of what we always were, right? We leave the illusion. I mean, I think things have to spin in this crazy global and local movie that we're watching. We've all been to the movie theaters. We've all known when things are like spiraling out of control and it's chaotic and there are storms and people are scared and all these things. And then the storm passes somehow and the heroes very often rise in some way. And I think we have to sort of almost have our own awareness of like, that's not my movie anymore. That's not my reality anymore. That's not something I'm going to give my life force to anymore. And I know you can speak as a Cathar who had that great trauma, that thought that you could love beyond in your own way. We're saying the same thing. That's not my movie. That's not my, at some level, in that time of the Piscean age, maybe like you said, where Jesus was told, it's not your time, it's not that time. Maybe that was true at a deeper level, but it couldn't be the reality in the movie that everybody was living. But this feels like, I think the reason there's so many star beings on the planet, that there's so many awakened souls, so many people attracted to the luminosity of our own light, right? It's to tip the scales. There's enough of us here. It may not seem that way sometimes, but there are enough. And we know that, I think it's either in this transmission or it's in a Marinades message, but we know the knowings that we know, and there's no way to unknow them now. And there's a critical mass of knowers. And that to me is maybe one of God's greatest trump cards, if you will, is that there's too many that know in a critical mass cosmic kind of way. There's too many that know the ridiculousness and the craziness of that movie, and we're not playing, and we aren't disrupted by this third incursion. It just, we see it, we can have challenges from it because we can watch family members or friends or other people get caught in the tornado of the movie. And I don't think it stops those who know still from knowing. Now you can have joyful knowing and enter a place of 0 point or peace about it or whatever, or you can struggle with your knowing. But I think that the path for those who came to be the knowers is to know. And whether you know it with joy or you know it with struggle, you're still a knower. And I think the knowers are here to help this planet turn back to the light side, back to the bright side, back to the God timeline, and all the things you've talked about where that Christ Sophia, those codes are in balance and in union, and it starts to gain traction, and it isn't usurped, it isn't disrupted in this new Aquarian age. And that is a piece that I haven't been feeling or thinking about quite so much myself, that we could have been knowing and feeling this at other critical points. But I don't know, the cosmic energies or the astrology didn't fully support the flip at that time. Or maybe there just weren't enough of us en masse who would be the knowers. And I kind of surprised how that phrase channeled through me when I was talking to a friend of ours, Diane, one day. I was talking about how feeling the swirl of energies on our planet right now. And I was saying, I'm remembering the knowings that I know. And that's just, it seems like an obvious statement. I'm knowing the knowing that I know, but it actually is quite profound, because I'm not talking about earthly knowing. I'm talking about galactic, cosmic, divine knowing that is the otherworldly energy that you were talking about. People who started the great religions were people who knew this, right? And they all came to teach us. And there are more of us that are knowing those teachings just in our presence here. And if we do that, if we continue to know the knowing that we know, the deeper knowing of the truth of the light, the darkness will not succeed, period. And I think God is very confident in those knowers. And it's not one knower. So it's not like we all bear the responsibility of like, earth will be destroyed if I falter in my faith and my knowing someday. I think there's too many of us that we can all have a bad day every now and again, and we're okay. Because no matter what, at the end of the day, God knows that you're the knower that you came to be. And not everybody may feel that they're in the role of knowing, but as more flips in the direction of the knowing, there's nothing that's going to stop the knowing. And then, like you said, all the ones that are the disruptors that are trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink to draw people, to lure people. It's the new Apple. It is the new Apple, this false reality, right? Or to make people truly feel, if you beat them down enough, that they have no other option but to eat the apple. Who knows that Adam and Eve, whether literally or metaphorically, ancestrally, some way, faced the impossible choice. They faced some kind of impossible choice. And I think we're being tested in that way. And the greatest strength I get is knowing the knowing that I know, right? And I feel that when I talk to you, you know, and we have been swept up in the storms. And maybe it was even more excruciating in the pain that you remember from your soul's history, that you knew so well. You knew it with pristine clarity, and to feel that that wasn't enough at that time. And yet it was to test your resolve that you can still know what you know, even though you had what you had then. You can still know it now when you knew it then and it didn't prevail. But now everything is on the light side. And if you don't feel, whoever's listening doesn't feel like, oh, well, maybe I'm not a knower who knows, I'm just hearing this for the first time or whatever, you can still add your energy into being one who knows what you know, that there's a much brighter future than what is being projected onto us, that they want us to accept, that they want us to create, to become their projectors of that reality. And for the people who listen to the podcasts on my channel, having Terry Cole Whitaker on recently, she was talking this way. I mean, that was a big message for her. She says, not my reality, right? And she gave a number of examples of levitating in her own experience, of like surviving a wicked accident at a sacred site where she was tumbling downstairs where people often tumble to their death, right? She was tumbling, but she, in her way, I don't know, entered some quantum alternative reality when she was in the air. And there was a part of her that in her consciousness said, not my reality. And she landed hard on her knee, and she tells that story, but she made it through that because it was not her reality to be the one that transitioned on that day. It wasn't her time to go. And I know people, just people listening to this, it's so powerful when you hear the stories of people who know what they know, and they know it beyond anything else. One of the other greatest examples of this is Suzette Faith Foster, who you may know, Paul, from some of our roundtables, but she was in a Christopher Reeve type accident. Does that sound familiar to you? She was on her mountain bike and had the same accident. Luckily, I think there was either another biker in the woods, or maybe somebody, just one person she had traveled with that day. That would be like divine intervention, right, beforehand. But had the same accident and broke her neck and stopped breathing. And anybody else would have died on the scene that day. But in her world, when she wasn't breathing, imagine the faith, like talk about a soul test. Imagine the faith, Suzette Faith Foster. That was her name before this all happened. This wasn't a chosen name. This was her like birth name and probably her life path name. I can't remember if it was 2 minutes. You know better than I do. How long can somebody go without breathing before all your systems shut down? But she knew in her own way, basically, she didn't say these words, "This is not my reality," but her way of saying that is, "God is my source." And she said it over and over in her head while she wasn't breathing. God is my source. And I don't know if it was on the second or third, I can't remember which time, but she was saying that. And how much of it, many of us would have the wits about us in that experience when you can't move, nothing is moving, and you're not even breathing. She had that faith. And on like the third time or something, like a strike of electrical lightning went through her body, and she started breathing again, right? And she has the most miraculous story. She tells it in a podcast on some of our channels, but powerful. And after she got through that, of course, the paramedics get there and are like, "Oh my gosh, most people would have died at the scene by this point." That was the first miracle, but there was a whole series of miracles. And when she got to the hospital, one of the most amazing like surgeons for that kind of injury happened to be on call that particular day. And he told her that she probably would never walk again, right? And she said, "No, I will walk again." And she also said, "I'm going to be out of here in a week." And he's like, "No, no, no." Like he was giving her the projected forecast. But she did exactly what we're talking about. She said, "That is not my reality." In her own way, she just kept saying, "God is my source." That was her way of connecting beyond the reality that was being given to her to accept. And she walked within 24 hours after that surgery, after this incredible injury. She said, "I felt like cement, but I walked." And they told her still she was going to be in the hospital for weeks, and she was out of there in a week, like she said. There is something so powerful when we can know beyond the shadow of a doubt in that phrase, "God is my source," or it can be what Terry Cole Whitaker that says, "Not my reality." I think we are seeing kind of implosionary madness that's going on in this swirl of energy in this crazy movie that seems to be reality. And I think more and more people have to get into that clear soul strength that comes from the heart, which you said, this reversing of the poles, guiding the mind to say, "That is not my reality." And then we look within and we ask ourselves, if that's not my reality, which seems to be in our external environment, then what is my reality? And we have to get to work to start claiming what that is. For Suzette, in that experience, it was walking again. It was, healing completely. And she still goes out for bike rides today. Like that is her reality, because that is the reality that she chose. And she chose to know nothing else but that single knowing in that moment. And I think that speaks to the knowing that we know. And that's the gnosis. That's the Gnostics. That's the things that you're talking about. There can be these incursions, but it doesn't have to be your reality if you don't choose it to be. And that takes some awakening, and that takes some work, and it takes learning how to discipline a busy ego mind that gets all these invitations to look at the disruptions instead of knowing that that's the illusion and we have much more to do that's a lot more joyful. And it sounds like we've got the age of Aquarius empowering us to be the knowing. So powerful.
Yeah. Remember, we're the incursion. It's not the other, it's not the darkness that's in the incursion. We are the incursion is the light in the darkness. That's the incursion. And so it was so powerful that it had to be withdrawn. Otherwise the darkness would have collapsed. And so the third incursion is the final incursion of light into darkness that brings us into a new age. They set it up as a house of cards, and they're doing everything that they can to try to keep you distracted from the truth. If one sincere person showed up on the public stage in the political arena, was nonpartisan and told you the truth, man, I don't know if anyone actually believed this person, but if you had one person who was sincere, who was loving, who was there to build bridges, it didn't matter whether you believed him or not, or her. Because I think that it might be a woman that will eventually, I think it has to be to pull us out of this. It's it would be irresistible even if you didn't agree with everything that this person would be saying, because the resonance of the truth is, like you said, you could feel the resonance more so than you just process it with your egotistical mind, because your egotistical mind has been poisoned and conditioned against a lot of these things. But if just one person was given a public voice, and go beyond this partisan insanity that's going on, or beyond these lower energy conflicts, and say, this is what we're going to do to rebuild. This is what we're going to do to, recreate a new society, not one that's, enslaved to AI, and not one that's enslaved to the technocracy that's being created, but one that actually cherishes, the human spirit. And that, and Jung actually said this. He said that the communist system was just destined to fail. He wrote this a little bit before it failed. He said capitalism's right behind it in the form that we have. He says, because these are systems of control that don't respect the individual person. They don't care about the individual person. And so even though they don't care about the individual person, he said they won't survive. And I think he's right, because communism did fall, and capitalism, I think, is teetering on its last legs. And we have to move beyond. And then we don't have time to talk about this. Maybe
another time
about value and about what true value is, as opposed to enslaving money system, which your lecture also your talk also talked about. I was surprised that it went in that direction. But we've been conditioned to believe what value in money is, when it's just a lie. It's not true. And so I think, like I said, they've constructed a house of cards, and once people who are doing things for others becomes a visible reality. It's already happening now.
It is already happening.
Once the media, maybe the media will never pay attention to it, but once alternative media, whatever it is, starts showing you how you can actually change things in a positive way by cooperating. Well, things are bad enough now where I think that you'll start to see it. When people just start showing you, hey, look at this is working. It's working for us. We're getting along. We're not fighting each other anymore. That's all people want to see. That's an irresistible human impulse or force. You can call it the Christ impulse, because that's what that is. And so we would overcome a lot of these problems very quickly if once that happened. And I guess the other thing is, is that you have to stop paying attention to what these people are doing, what these enslavers are doing. That feeds it life. To give them your attention is feeding them and enabling them to continue to do what they do. If everyone turned off their media, their social media, and they turned off all the media, regardless of what it is, they turned it off and boycotted it for a week or two, just see what would happen.
Mm.
You know, no one watches the news anymore. No one watches your stupid commercials anymore. No one listens to it. No one participates. Just, you know, but that everyone's so hooked on it. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe it'll happen. Maybe it won't happen. But, you know, that was a time back in the 70s where people would become active and they would become militant. I'm going to boycott this. And that would happen. So.
But we weren't in the age that we're in now.
We're not. It's a different age.
It's a different age. That is a game changer.
Yeah.
It's an age changer, right? It's a consciousness changer. And that's a knowing. Like, again, somebody might say, well, what's the knowing I can know? You can know that's not our age anymore. That's not our reality, because we're in a different age. And I don't know. I mean, I know it could be a whole other, I'd love to have a conversation with you all about the age of Aquarius and the things you know about the energetic seeds of this age. But is there a way, just in very short order, for you to just, if there was an essence of Aquarius, what is it? Is it love?
Yeah. Well, Aquarius.
I know it's a big one.
Aquarius has a shadow too, and it says a light and a side to it and a shadow side to it. And so people who have the Aquarian energy can be altruistic, amazing people. Promethean energy is Aquarian energy. What was Prometheus doing? He was giving us forethought. He was steering us on a global level to become greater people and giving us the power of the gods. But on a personal level, it doesn't really. It's not really about a personal. It doesn't really connect us on a personal level. So, I don't know. And people who are Aquarius, they could be mass murderers too.
Oh, wow.
So it just depends. It just depends on what
Which
what
eighth sphere they're listening to.
What eighth sphere you're at. So, but the Aquarian age itself, and maybe we can end it at this point. I think is upon us. It's about great social upheavals. It's about working together cooperatively for greater good. But we're also, I'm looking at the astrology of the spring equinox, and it's perplexing, and I don't really want to talk about it or comment on it right now. But 2 days after the equinox is when Pluto enters into the sign of Aquarius, and
that's interesting.
It's a 20-year experience.
What date is that? Is that on the March?
The 20th is the equinox. I think it's the 22nd, where Pluto actually enters into the sign of Aquarius, and then we got 20 years, and about halfway through that is 2033.
Wow.
And so maybe that's around the time where the transition occurs or the ascension occurs. I'm not sure, but there's going to be a lot of upheaval. We're going to see that, and something's brewing that's going to happen later this year. I know what it is. I can guess what it is looking at the charts, but something's brewing, and something's going to happen. I don't know. And I'll publish this before the March 20th equinox, but something looks weird. Something looks strange.
Well, I know you are the deep diver, Dr. Paul Panzica, and people will be able to see that on your website at beyondthesoulsmeridian.org, right?
Yep.
Yeah, well, I love having these conversations. I learn so much every time we talk. And it's really like it's like a remembering, it's like an activation of the knowings. And the last thing maybe to seed our listeners with is whatever your language might be, I think we can take some cues of light from a Suzette Faith Foster, who maybe both of those phrases, which is, well, Terry Cole Whitaker first, of the negative, the crazy that's swirling around. That is not my reality. That's a nice phrase. That is not my reality. And then what's the affirmation? God is my source, right? God is my source. And that's life-giving. And however people play with that language, they can find their own words that's going to work for you. But, you know, there are miracles to be had amidst these storms. And if we can orient to miracles, and we don't have to orient so much to the destruction and the mayhem that is going to be happening, it's going to test our faith in the swirl of all of that. Can we know what we're made of, that we're made of light? Can we know that in these times? Very powerful. We're going to teach ourselves kind of this, I would say, the light stuff, the star stuff that we truly are made of. Or will it be so enticing to look at the sea of crazy and kind of sink lower into those vibrations where your choices get narrower and narrower and narrower, and that does become your reality, right? These are the choices at soul level that we're making right now in these times. And I'm so grateful for people, teachers like you, messengers, who look into the deep, vast, you know, the bigger picture in a lot of these ways, and help us find some clarity in the storms, and maybe even orient ourselves to the light. So that is, I think, why you and I are here and why we share our messages, Paul. So thank you for joining me. Come back, let's do it again. Let's talk in March if we can. And I thank our listeners. I am trying to expand both audiences for Whole Soul School and Foundation, and also Whole Soul Mastery. And so I'm sharing some podcasts and some things, not all, but on both channels when I can. And I think this is one to be shared in that way. So thank you. We'll have you back. And blessings to everybody. And really take to heart whatever you can from this message today, and see what is awakening in you to know in your own knowing, right? So we'll talk to you soon. Blessings, everyone.